Welcome to another episode of Critical Moves. This is Tim here, and I'm joined by the one and only and almighty Al.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about our guest. Hello. When you said wonderful almighty.
Well, Al the Almighty, that sounds pretty good.
It does.
And we have our guest here today, Peter, of a significant YouTube channel, Perafilozof, if I'm pronouncing that right. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners that might or might not know you yet?
Yes, of course, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. So my name is Peter, and I started my channel about more than a decade ago at this point because I was watching these other content creators doing Shogun 2 Total War multiplayer battle commentaries, and I was playing Shogun 2 at that time. I was doing like 100 wins to 1 loss, and I was top of my game. I was cocky and young, and I thought if these guys can do this, I can do this. So I just started making my own videos, and then I started learning just how hard it was to actually record, edit, write, think of a script, prepare thumbnails, and everything that goes along with it. And then I went into some other genres like city building, base building, and so forth. But once my videos about RTS games, which are my passion from the young age, started taking off, I decided to put that in the first place on my channel and just go back to some other games occasionally.
Yeah, and with a pretty big success, I would say. Over the years, you've accumulated like a large amount of videos now that you've put out. And I guess you've been talking a lot about the topic of today, which is the future of RTS games. When we say the future of RTS games, what are the first words that come to mind for you?
Unfortunately, the first word and the only word that really matters is money. Because I'm constantly facing developers who want to make games, RTS games, have great ideas, but they just can't find the funding. They can't find investors, publishers, and even if they do, they're not really good deals because they don't trust the genre to be profitable for them. And so the offers they give them are not something indie developers, especially lone indie developers, want to take.
I think it's relative though, isn't it? Because if you look at a small indie dev team of maybe 10, 12 people, they can survive on far less money than the AAA studio with 300 employees. So I guess it's a relative thing. You're right, money is important, but you don't need as much to run a small indie team.
Don't get me wrong. It's not about that they don't want to offer them enough money. It's that the offers are so rare because the money profited from RTS games is so low compared to other genres, at least in the eyes of the publishers and investors.
Thankfully, nowadays, making video games is more accessible than ever before. It's easier than ever before to make an RTS game as well. You don't need that much knowledge about textures and so on. You can find so much online. And I think that's something that we are seeing that a lot of indie developers have picked up making games and as their pastime at first, and then maybe slowly moving into a semi-professional, and then eventually like making the full transition to making a complete game full time, abandoning their jobs and making something really cool. What do you think of that? What do you see? Are there a couple of projects up and coming that are not coming from the AAA studios that you're looking forward to?
I'll take that in two parts. So the first part, yes, there are indie developers who are wearing 10, 15 hats. They're doing prototyping, marketing, quality control. They're creating videos, trailers. They're becoming content creators just to be able to market their games. So they're wearing many, many hats. And yes, they can find fellow content creators, fellow developers who will help them, make it easier for them. So they're basically a one-man indie studio. But on the other hand, if you look at the time that that takes, they are making those games for a decade. And in that time, they have to remake it, remodel it, maybe even transfer it to a new engine. And the audience just cools off after a while. I can see that happening to many games that are taking a very long time to make. A developer of Dwarf, for example, were very excited about it 2 3 years ago. Now they are starting to cool off because they cannot see a release date. They don't see as much content as they would like. But it's just the main developer plus maybe two guys and some help. They were getting funded by donations basically and their own paychecks. So now they're contemplating other sources of income. But even if they go to a publisher or make a Kickstarter or anything, it's still going to take them years. And the audience gets, I saw data point that says 25,000 new games just on Steam per year. So you expect somebody to wait for your game while it's getting passed by 100,000 games in 4 or 5 years. The second part, you asked me which ones I'm looking most forward to. Well, for these are a mix of games which are close to be released and which are probably not going to get released in a few years. So I'll just count them off because I prepared the list for our conversation. So we've got Global Conflagration, which should be out this year. We've got Dustfront, which probably will be out this year, but I'm not 100% sure. Dwarf, probably in a few years. Sanctuary Shattered Sun, full release in a few years. Ashes of the Singularity 2, maybe end of this year, maybe beginning of 2027. Empire Eternal, maybe 2027. Zero Space should be this year, but in early access. Hyperwar, probably 2027, 2028. Defcon Zero Frontlines of Tomorrow, maybe 27, probably 28. Immortal Gates of Pyre, TBA basically. I can't even say which year it's going to be because the team is going through some transition issues.
What I'm going to take from that is that there are a hell of a lot of games which are in development. I don't want to rest on the negatives, and you're absolutely right. When you have a situation where somebody announces that they're developing a game, and then a year passes, and I think back to Falling Frontier, and I think we covered this in one of our previous episodes where they put a news post out in 2023 to say it was being delayed. And then the very next one was 2 years later in November 2025 to say it was being delayed. The only thing which is sure about RTS development is that these games are going to be delayed. Those are negatives. However, there's many positives, and you've just listed 12, 13, 14 titles there, which are new games which are being developed, and we are going to see at some point. So it's a reason to be cheerful, isn't it? And I'm not very cheerful usually, but that's a reason to be cheerful, isn't it?
When we talk to developers, something that comes up often is that they don't feel like there's so much in competition with each other, especially within something a subgenre like the RTS genre, because I do feel that what this genre needs is one big breakthrough of a game that breaks open into the wider gaming scene, where a lot of people from outside of RTS comes over to RTS to play that one game that they really enjoy. And I'm thinking of an example, something like Elden Ring that came out, and suddenly the Souls likes were a huge thing, and everyone wanted to play games like that. And if you have something like this for RTS again, it could bring like a huge crowds, and then suddenly the funding comes after that as well. So I think if we have one or two big hits in the coming year or two, that could have like a snowball effect on a lot of these other indie games.
When we interviewed the DEFCON Zero developers, which was a few episodes ago, I think one of the things they said was that they don't look at other RTS developers as competition because they want to have this community effect. What they said was if their game is successful, other RTS games will be successful because people start playing RTS games. Peter, do you see that happening with your understanding of the industry and of these small developers? Are they supporting each other? Is there space for all of these games?
I do think there's space because by the comments I see people are very specific in what they like to play. And while some people will say, I like Age of Empires like games, I like Command and Conquer like games, then you'll find people who are mentioning and saying, hey, do you know if somebody made a game like this? And they specify exactly the kind of gameplay they would like to play. And that's basically something that nobody ever made. And I'm struggling to find even something close. So I think there's actually a huge array of games that people want to play. It's just that the quality that they expect is much higher than can be produced by the people and the funding and the development time that they have at the moment.
So something I'm also seeing is like these big content creators, and I think that's a big reason that keeps the strategy game very well and alive, and a place where people come together, is these big streamers of like competitive RTS games. I'm thinking like in Age of Empires, you have Hera, or in Warcraft 3, you have Grubby, and so on. I love seeing them also try out other RTS games, and they cross over to each other's games sometimes and teach each other the other game. And I think that brings a lot of movement in the RTS genre as well. And sometimes they try out also these newer games. And I think that's also a big way that the audience can grow with these games.
In last week's episode, we did innovation in strategy games, and we spoke to Dr. Ben Angel about that. And he talked specifically about RTS games. And he said that you are seeing all these titles, but they tend to be modeled after Command and Conquer, StarCraft, Warcraft, and Supreme Commander. And that tends to be quite siloed in terms of those are the only types of games that you're getting. A few weeks back, Nuno, who used to be one of our podcast host, he put an article out on strategyandwargaming.com where he talked about tactical duality. I think was the word that he used. Where he said we're seeing this almost these two branches of games being developed, where you have your classic base builders, but also tactical games as well. Are you seeing that? Or are you seeing more like the first example where you have new games following a specific pattern based upon those three very, very classic titles that were mentioned?
It's a huge array. Let's say 50% will go after the most famous games, but the other 50% will try to innovate, will try to mix genres that haven't been mixed before. And while, as I said, they might not have the finish, the quality that players might expect, it's important that somebody at least tries an idea, and maybe a whole genre or subgenre will be born out of it. And just to connect to what Tim was saying, yes, developers are actually doing the same thing as content creators. They go onto each other's discords and they talk about the other discord and the other game, because they've realized they don't need their audience to be just for them. They need their audience to be for the genre in general, and then to jump between games. And that's the way to expand the audience, and not to go just like content creators are seeing fewer and fewer audience, fewer and fewer viewers, the more they do the single game. It's like on YouTube when you do a Let's Play episode and the first one gets 10,000 views, the second one gets 1,000, the third one gets 500. It's because people are really quickly jumping from one game to the other, and content creators are realizing they have to adapt. And so they are trying to move into different games, even different genres.
And I would say RTS is this very delicate niche as well between the accessibility and the complexity. Like you have these different subgenres, but then it's easy for an RTS game to start evolving more towards like the hardcore grand strategy game, Paradox, and so on, or to go into very accessibility to get a wider audience, so to speak, and get like a auto battler, for example, where it's really easy to pick up, and it's very easy to start playing the game, but the complexity isn't as broad as some of the other games, and RTS has like this really delicate balance between the two that gets easily lost into one of these two extremes, I would say.
That's very true, and I just wanted to point out like a few games that go into very different directions. For example, there is a solo indie developed game called Unnatural Worlds, and while the game's premise is close to something like Supreme Commander, maybe the person behind that game has created a game where his worlds are shaped with shapes that are anything but a regular sphere. So you've got donuts, you've got squares, triangles, and that's your planet. And you can go around the edge and attack the player who's on the other edge. So that's like one of the more crazier projects. Then you've got maybe, who should I point out? Like Space Rain, which just I think currently is coming out or in a few days, where you got a space game that is half space FPS or third person shooter in space with your ship actually being your what you shoot at, but you also have fleets that you lead. So you've got that RTS part of it. Then there is Project 37, also a solo indie developed game. So the person went for Command and Conquer style game, but he has a special outlines of territories that you can only build on them specific buildings, and then you have to capture other territories on which you can build other specific buildings.
Is that where the future of RTS lies then? Because there was a comment that somebody put on our YouTube channel saying I did a video on the top 5 best base building games, and they commented, and they weren't being negative. They said they were so sad that the genre was dead. And so I've come back to them and say, well, actually, it isn't. There's these games which are being developed. But is that where the future lies with this almost cross pollination, I suppose, where you have RTS as the core game type, but then you're bringing in other types of games in order to improve the experience? Is that what you see with your coverage, your understanding of where the genre is going?
I believe so because, well, as I mentioned, 50% of the audience still just wants the next Age of Empires, the next Command and Conquer game, the next Supreme Commander. The other 50% says, I'm bored, I'm tired, I don't want to see these games anymore redone a million times. I want to see something new, something different, something I never played before. And that's exactly what the other 50% of developers are doing. They're combining something that was never combined before and coming up with ideas that might not work on that first iteration, might not work on the second, but somebody else might pick up that and roll it along a little bit more and shine that third.
Do you have an example of where that's being done really, really well?
Well, let me think about it. You could say that the developers of maybe Godsworn, because they look like Warcraft, but they don't actually play exactly like Warcraft. And so you have this mythical world, you've got these mythical creatures, you've got these spells, but then again, even if your characters do level up, they level up and have very different spells. They don't have inventory. So while that may remind you of World of Warcraft, it's very much not like Warcraft. And I think that if you had more players, more marketing, it would be a big game.
Yeah, something that I mentioned before, and I'm not afraid to mention it again. I feel like something that's really important to get these working, because this cross pollination, it's easy to have this idea of like, oh, imagine if we make Warcraft but with this, or imagine if we introduce this mechanic, or combine these two weird things or something like that. I think there's so many ideas out there, and some of them are going to be terrible and some of them are going to be amazing. And then to have tools to try these out and get people to play them and test them and then talk to their friends what they like or don't like. I think it's incredibly important to have a way to test these out and get them to be played very early on and not have these like many year long projects. And then after having put in like 5 years of work, finally getting to the end result and being like, oh, but this is actually not that fun. This was actually not that great of an idea. And I think in the golden age of RTS, you had so many custom map editors that allowed for all this creativity to try it out. When we think of MOBA, that comes from a custom map editor, even Auto Battler. This is kind of crazy if you think about it. Warcraft 3 had a custom maps editor. They made Dota. Dota became a huge hit, bigger than Warcraft 3 ever was. And then they made Dota 2. And in Dota 2, there's a custom map editor, and someone made Auto Battler in Dota 2. And now there's this huge subgenre, this Auto Battlers, that comes from a custom game of a custom game, basically. I think, yeah, getting developers to try out in a very easy way and having tools to do that is a way to get a lot of innovation and to find out through trial, basically to trial, to find out what is the most fun for so many people.
Yeah, I totally agree because if you, as you just outlined the history of the MOBA genre, it got created out of an idea that came from an RTS game. And why would that not happen again? History is what we learn from, and it repeats.
It does. Tim and I are both RTS fans, and of course, Tim's involved with Beyond All Reason. He's been trying to get me to play Beyond All Reason, but I so far haven't because I don't like multiplayer games. I'm very much a single player gamer. I love a grand campaign. I think it's just the most fabulous way to experience a real time strategy game. Now, years and years ago, there was some research done, and they said that about 80% of RTS players consider themselves to be casual single player gamers. A month ago, I put a post on Reddit and I said, what's more important, single player campaign or multiplayer battles? And it came out about 76% of respondees said that the single player campaign was most important. And that was over 1,000 people who replied to that poll. With the RTS games which are being developed now, do you see developers focusing on a single player experience, or are they falling into the trap of thinking that multiplayer is the answer to everything?
That's an excellent question. And I myself asked my audience several times, and it's always comes up that single player is most important. And I see it coming up from several points. Like, first of all, the old games focused on single player because you didn't have that developed online services. Multiplayer, you couldn't really play that much multiplayer. So the point of those games was to create an excellent single player that you could extend the story with an expansion pack and sell that. And that was what you sold. But the last 20 years showed us how much internet has helped develop multiplayer games, and now you have games that focus on multiplayer exclusively. So you have a whole new market that's multiplayer games, not games just games, but multiplayer games. And when you have indie developers who know that most of the sales come from single player experience, players who want that experience, they are stopped by the fact that single player ends up costing far more than multiplayer. Even though multiplayer might end up being more technically demanding to create, single player requires more money because you have to pay voice actors, you have to pay writers, you have to pay for a cinematic movie if you want to add that, or FMV sequences. You have to have a whole stage, you have to have a professional crew to record that. And that's something that costs a lot, but is only profitable if you have a large audience to pay for that. While multiplayer games always find ways to monetize the player and find a way to earn through that. And a lot of players today will jump on the multiplayer simply because their friends are playing it and it's easier to connect, while the older audience sticks to single player. And on the other hand, the older audience has more money, so they don't have a problem paying 60 US dollars if it's an excellent single player game, while the younger audience don't have access to that much money, so they'll play the free multiplayer game.
I would also say that single player, not only it requires more different kind of people to do it, I think there's a certain art form to creating a really good story and a really good campaign that is difficult to do. It's like making a beautiful painting. It's a lot easier to mass produce something than it is to make something really beautiful because it's subjective. There's an art form to it, and when it comes to multiplayer, the content is the other person you put in front of them. You create a competitive environment, so a game must be well balanced, and there needs to be a certain skill ramp that is enjoyable to learn and so on. So that's something. But I would say a whole story, a character driven campaign that is engaging, that wants you, oh, let me play one more mission, with surprises maybe in the story, with you rooting for some outcome. That is, I think, simply more difficult to do well, and it's easy to. I think it's easy to be a bit delusional about your own skills of making something like that, and then some people might be making a story that's just simply not that interesting without even being aware that they're doing that.
I completely agree. And if you think about, if we walk into a museum of PC games, the games that are most influential on a lot of people are the ones that had a great story, that gave a great experience, that had amazing music. And that's all, as you said, art. And that's what people remember the most. Like, if you ask artist players their most memorable characters, it's either from Red Alert, or Command and Conquer, or StarCraft. And that's about it. you'll rarely find anybody mention any other character.
I think one of the biggest moments in RTS gaming for so many people is when Arthas comes home from his campaign and goes into the throne room, and his father, the king, is like, "What are you doing, my son?" And he says, "I'm succeeding you, father,"
Yeah,
and
I get
drives
chills.
drives a sword through him. Yeah, right. We
I
all
got
we all
chills
been there.
right
We all
now.
played that. Right, right. This is such a big moment. And what is it? It's story, it's characters, and it's engagement.
And it's what you remember the most. Like,
Hmm.
think about stories. You watch a movie 30 years ago and you still remember a scene. And that's just like you explained now. You remember a scene from a game and that sticks with you the longest. It's just how our brains are wired. And that's why such artistic games with great storytelling experiences remain at the forefront of what's considered the best. Even though they might be mechanically not the best, that story sticks far longer than the mechanics. And that's why I think Al is going to finally enjoy Bar once, now that they've dropped lore, that they're going to prepare campaigns, and once he like gets invested into the story, into the characters, he is going to have a much easier time getting into the multiplayer because he'll be invested in the universe. It's like giving, I know, if RTS that has Elder Scrolls as a theme, if it dropped, and even if it was like bad, it would still sell better than anything at that moment on Steam or across any other platform, just because of the Elder Scrolls name.
Well, funny enough, I was actually going to ask Tim a question about this because, and I think we have talked about this before about Beyond All Reasons, single player experience, and I think that you said that there's things in the works. Could you give us a little bit of a brief overview of what's going on at the moment with that?
Yeah, there's a team now looking at a single player campaign. It's a big thing. It will take a long time. You talked about long development times for indie games. Well, this is definitely that. So it's nowhere near being finished, but it's being worked on actively. There's lore master. There's some lore that has already been dropped, and there's active developments that will take a long time. But it's going to happen, and it's happening, and one day you will enjoy it.
2036.
Maybe not that long, but yeah.
These things do take time. I understand that, and what you say about art is really true. I think the worst single player experiences are the ones where it's essentially a vehicle for presenting a series of skirmish missions,
Yeah.
and I think it's just a really bad way of doing things. You might as well just not bother if that's going to be your single player experience.
Yeah, the thing about Bar is that it's so many people who enjoy the multiplayer experience who are playing it, and then who are like, "Oh, I would like to add this to the game. I would like to spend some of my free time and like improve the game to make it have this." And then what is focused on so much is, well, obviously the multiplayer experience, because that's how people got drawn in the first place. And you, someone who enjoys single player, hasn't joined Bar yet, so you're not looking to add single player elements to the game. So that's been what has made the development of the single player campaign being delayed so long. But now Bar has become so big and so many people have taken part of it that there's now been active development for the single player campaign. So that's why it's been so long and much more multiplayer focused, like a self-fulfilling prophecy, as you will. You were talking, Peter, about big names drawing a crowd. What do you think of Game of Thrones RTS?
I noticed it a while back, and they had that trailer, and then right after that, they posted the dev diary. But since then, I haven't seen much. I'm just afraid was that a vertical slice to get wish listings, and that they have a target, let's say 100,000, 500,000, a million wish lists that they are waiting before they greenlight any more development. And I'm afraid that that might be the type of game or development style that's happening with that game.
Because if we're gonna be honest, like as much as I hated the last season, like everybody else did, like Game of Thrones is such an amazing setting for an RTS game, right? Like the story, the betrayal, the backstabbing, like it would be a really lovely setting, I believe.
Yeah, and that's not the only one. As I mentioned, the Elder Scrolls, which fans already made a mod for Battle for Middle Earth. They made a mod for it,
Oh
and
yeah.
they're trying to do like the Oblivion faction being the next faction that they're developing. And there are other amazing IPs that could be developed into RTS games, especially the ones with good stories. And that is something that, if you look at, no big company as of yet has invested any large amounts of money into that. And that gets you wondering why. And then you just go back to what I talked about before, to profits. They just don't see the RTS game being one that makes a lot of profit, because okay, they sell it for 60. Once they pay everybody who needs to be paid in the chain, they are down to 20 of profits per unit sold. And then they need to sell millions, because first of all, they had to pay for an expensive IP, they had to pay for voice actors, they had to pay for cinematics, they had to pay for who knows what else to just get it shipped and prepared in a proper amount of time and not take 10 years. And then they just look at other games and say, okay, what was the last RTS game that shipped, I don't know, 5 million? And then somebody from the back of the room says, StarCraft 2 2010. And they go, which year is it? 2026? Okay, we're not doing that.
Yeah, and I guess that's a difficult where you need a combination of like really good, fun, original, innovative gameplay and an enticing IP, and having that combo is it's so easy to focus on one or the other. Like you'll have these big name drops of IPs where like, oh yeah, we're making this popular new TV show into an RTS game, but it feels like such a cash grab that they just develop like half-assedly a game and then like try to collect money. And then you have on the other side like these amazing wonderful game designs that are really fun to play, but then if you want to get into the story of it, it's a whole new IP, and it can get really tough as a player to get invested into a whole new universe where you have to learn like these new bizarre names you've never heard about, and there's this apparently there's a planet over there that does something, or like this new type of magic, and it needs to be so well presented for you to immerse yourself in it, especially in an RTS game where you're quite far away from everything, right? The camera's far away, and it can be feel like, oh, I have to learn all these names, I have to know who is who and what's the relation between all these things. Whereas if you have an existing big IP, it's so easy because you already know all of the names, you know the environment, you know what kind of environment it is. So having these two combined, I think is really really tough.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's like content fatigue at this point, because I, for example, love to read sci fi and fantasy books. And I've been reading them for the last 30 years. But if you ask me, like, what's your favorite? It would take me half an hour just to try and remember all the ones I've read. It's hundreds. I mean, how am I supposed to recall something I read in 2005, maybe? That's really hard to remember everything, all the details, but maybe that would be my favorite. But at this point, I'm at content fatigue. And so if somebody writes a new book in a new universe, I would rather just somebody else who I read 15 books already, I would read his 16th rather than the first in that new universe.
Yeah,
It's just how
yeah.
it works. You're content fatigued. At this point, several years ago, when I started focusing on RTS games, you could wake me up in the middle of the night and ask me, what are the top games you're looking forward to? What are the best games? What are the most inventive games? I would easily spell them out to you, because that would be 10, 15, 20 titles. But right now, when I'm writing my scripts, preparing videos, or answering questions, it takes me a while to remember, because I'm following at this point hundreds of games, maybe even 1,000 at this point, after 5 years of following the whole genre, because I took that insane task of looking at the entire genre, instead of like most content creators who will focus on one game, or just one game and its sequels, or one game and its lookalikes and something like that. I chose the most difficult path. And so sometimes I just stop and I'm like, wait, what's the name of that game? And somebody would go like, hey, aren't you supposed to know everything? Dude, there's so much to know. I cannot keep it all in my head at this point.
On the point that Tim made there, or that you both made about recognized IPs, I wanted to mention Dawn of War 4, because when you gave us that list at the start, Peter, of the games which are coming out over the next couple of years, they were all indie titles, maybe solo dev titles. And Dawn of War 4 seems to kind of exist in this weird space where it stands apart from all of these indie titles, with it being a very well a globally recognized IP from a established publisher in Deep Silver. Do you see the impending release of Dawn of War 4 as perhaps a watershed moment where we might see the bigger name publishers coming back into the RTS space, or is this just a one-off?
In my personal view, it's a big question mark. I have in front of me a list of RTS games that I prepared for this video, and it says RTS games I'm skeptical about. And the first one on that list, Warhammer Dawn of War 4. And it's next to titles like Falling Frontier. I'll explain why. Total War, Warhammer 40k, Game of Thrones, War of Westeros, already explained why. Fractured Alliance, Colonizers, Dino Lords, and a few other games. So the reason why I'm skeptical about these, and Dawn of War in particular, is because first of all they're going back to a game that was already made, and they're just making it better but not calling it a remaster or a remake. And they are changing the story, they're changing the factions and stuff, but it's not the same game, and yet they're advertising it as if it's the same game, just with a little bit of improvement here and there. And I understand that you make a new game, people don't come, and then they say I like the original game more, and then they are just throwing their hands up and saying, okay, I'll just make that first game you like so much again, and let's see you buy it. So I get the developers, but I'm also a bit skeptical because it's the other developer, not the same developer as of the original franchise. So they changed it. They changed the people who are working on it, although they're hardcore fans, which is noted by their dev blogs. So that's true. So I'm giving it a 50-50. Like, it could be just this amazing experience that restarts the whole Dawn of War franchise, or people are just going to find reasons to hate it and not like it. And if I may just take a few more minutes to talk about the other games I'm skeptical about. So Falling Frontier, even though I love the idea, I was blown away when I first saw it 6 years ago. The 6 years ago, the developer has changed the game at least 3 times by my reckoning, and how much I'm following it, in how it looks, in how it works, in the camera, the angle. And just a few days ago, he posted the newest combat gameplay trailer. And when I looked at that, and I remembered, and I just went and sorted his videos by oldest, and clicked on the oldest one and looked at that game that he showed 6 years ago, I was like, but this is better. This looks better to me. I wanted to play this, not what you're showing me today after 6 years of development. And I'm astounded that Hooded Horse picked him up like maybe 3 years at this point ago, and he still hasn't shipped that game. I'm just astounded because Hooded Horse usually picks up games, the publisher Hooded Horse, at the end, like near the finish line, and they are giving this person another 3 years, more people, more money to remake the game constantly, expand the scope, change it, and so on. So that's the reason why I'm skeptical, even though it looks so good.
Yeah, interestingly, if you go to the YouTube channel of Star Fox Studios of Falling Frontier, the last video before this one is 2 years ago, and they posted one as of this recording 6 hours ago. So that's quite interesting that we happen to be just on new content of close combat from them. Yeah, I don't know. I agree with you, even though I did say I think iteration is important. So if they're finding out that the game they were making before is not fun and they're changing that, I think that could be a really good thing. But yeah, it's hard to tell until you play it yourself, I could think.
Yeah, and as I was wanted to say, Warhammer 40k, by my reckoning, that was just a vertical slice we saw in the last 15 seconds of the trailer. It doesn't look to me like they had the game. They just had what they think the game should look like, and they created a vertical slice. Now, somebody else might say it wasn't a vertical slice, but if you look at how Medieval 3 looks like in the last developer blog, it looks alpha, pre-alpha. While what we saw in those last 15 seconds of the trailer for Warhammer 40k Total War, it looked like maybe beta, maybe just before release. So I have a feeling that was just a vertical slice.
Okay. You didn't answer my question though. Do you think that this Dawn of War 4 coming out from King Art Games and Deep Silver is an indicator that we're going to see more mainstream and major IPs make it into RTS, or is this just a flash in the pan? Is it just a one-off? And are we in the realms of we're now in the indie space only when it comes to RTS games?
Yeah, sorry about that. So basically, what I see is third game, fourth game, fifth game, and that's the big games. Big games are going into the fourth, fifth, sixth sequel at this point, and you don't see basically anybody except Tempest Rising being a new game, a new IP that got major funding, or at least maybe on a double A level of funding. Everything else is either indie or a third, fourth, fifth sequel of a major franchise. So people are only investing into what's proven to be already a good franchise.
So what you're saying is Warcraft 4?
Blizzard is not what it used to be after all the acquisition, sales, and changes in leadership, in ownership. I don't expect basically anything out of them when it comes to RTS games. They might even give the IP to somebody new, somebody who's going to be brought in from the side, who knows how to make an RTS game but doesn't have the IP. And maybe then something like that will happen, like StarCraft 3 or Warcraft 4. But as I said, they simply have other games which are far, far, far more profitable to invest into.
I want to make sure that we're talking about the future here, but I want to go back in time a little bit to 2011 when you really started your journey as a content creator. Was the time when Command and Conquer Generals 2 was announced, and then in 2013, so 2 years after that, they canceled it, which was essentially the end of that franchise. Nothing ever came out after that other than the remastered collection and a mobile game. Have you had any insight or any view of, EA released the full source code for Generals 2, and there's a whole community drive to remake certain parts of that game. They've introduced patches and all that kind of stuff. Have you seen anything which excites you about that project, or is it something which has passed you by?
Frankly, I see it as a zombie game that is, it's put on an altar, as in we don't have anything better, so let's zombify this project that was started as a way to monetize RTS games, and then the publisher saw the overwhelming negativity of the testers and said, okay, screw this project, let's just shut it down, it's not going to work, these people don't like to be monetized, we cannot get extra money out of them once they buy the main game, let's just forget about this. And they put it in the bin, and it's been there ever since. They just saw the remastered as a cash grab basically, and found the few people they could to make that remaster. It's great that we got it. It's amazing for a new generation. I'm just waiting for my son to be old enough to let him play the remaster and feel such excellent gameplay and storytelling. But the company that has that IP is one of the sorriest. I am not allowed to say to call them the names I want to call them, but
You
they
can
shouldn't
you can say
own that
whatever you like,
IP.
man. You can say whatever you like. There's no there's no airs and graces here. So you're talking about EA, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that there's a I think the sentiment runs through everything that we do in terms of the way the EA has treated that particular franchise. Uh, but when they started Generals 2, there was this geopolitical thriller storyline and branching campaigns and all sorts of things going on. And it was only when 2 years later they said, actually, let's monetize this, let's make it free to play, and then sell people campaigns. That was really what killed it, and by extension killed the entire franchise. And I understand what you say about it's a zombification of the game, but it, it saddens me. It really does. And I just hope that what we can expect in the future from the genre makes up for the utter betrayal that the community received from EA 13 years ago.
Yeah. So the one thing that annoys me is that the audience is so both stuck with that franchise and doesn't want to let go, because if they were able to let go, they would be able to embrace new games, and new games could grow, and talented developers could get funding, could sell their games, and produce new games that could be even better one day. And I'm going to be crucified for saying this, better than Command and Conquer at some point. But by sticking to our 30, 40-year-old games and then zombifying some last remnants of their projects, we are not supporting the people who could make the next such amazing game.
Just to push back ever so slightly, because you're right, the audience isn't letting go, but it also seems that developers aren't letting go as well. You mentioned Tempest Rising, and when we did the innovation episode last week with Ben Angel, who's from Capture Age, he's worked on the Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, and he's worked on the Anna franchise, and it was really quite damning. I think he said about Tempest Rising, he said it could just have been CNC5. So are developers and publishers willing to let go of that yet? Not just the audience.
They are not. You can see that. You got Age of Empires 4. You will have Age of Empires 5.
Age of Empires 4 is not very fun. I'll say it.
Yeah, but as you can see, as I said before, those huge franchises just keep getting sequels because they are familiar, they have huge fan bases, and they will keep on making. I mean, when my kid grows up, he'll probably play Age of Empires 14 or something like that. I can guarantee you that.
On that note, I guess I would like to ask one more question. This is maybe for the developers who are hearing us here on our podcast. What would you like to see more of in RTS games? What trend or what mechanic? What components? What would you tell developers? Hey, do this more.
I would definitely encourage more co-op because that's what people are used to. They're used to with playing like that from other games, and that's what social media encourages you to do, to play with friends, to share your successes and such. I would definitely encourage maybe finding a way to connect players through their game, like adding chat, of course, but that's old school, like adding a sort of social media, creating your own fake social media inside of a game where you could keep people. You will notice at this point people will turn on Discord on one screen and they'll have their game turned on the other, and the game will just be on loading screen and they'll be talking to their friends. So why not combine those two? Why not have them talking to their friends inside your game, and maybe they'll start even playing and then they'll have some casual fun, and that's fine. But you also have to have challenges. I've noticed new developers of new games starting to put in challenges so that players could like put their best score on the developers social media, that they could brag to their friends that they've reached this score, and then that maybe will have an effect on their friend to say, "Oh, I'll beat your score. I'll show you," and stuff like that. Interaction between people, because you cannot do what developers did before you had internet, when you had just huge campaigns and storytelling experiences that you experience for yourself, and then maybe you wrote an after action report online. Some people probably don't even know what that is if they're a younger generation. What's an after action report? And you'll go on a forum and tell about your experience and stuff, but that's not how it works today. It works online, it works live. You're talking directly to your friends, you're online with them while playing the game. You're not telling them about it afterwards, and that's a huge shift and something that developers have to get into. As for mechanics directly, leveling, having not loot but meaningful progression, customization, especially maybe something that goes beyond just customizing your character, customizing your UI, customizing your looks of your base, customizing what components you can use. Customization is very important. That's why builder games are such a huge success on Steam and other platforms, because people like to build, they like to create, and having mode free to what do they call them, sandbox modes, Why not have a sandbox mode? You have a base building game, base building RTS. Why don't you have a base building mode where you can just build infinitely and then just spawn in enemies to see how your base is going to fare? That's how you create other genres, basically. You're just having that modability, you have that extra type of game mode, and you let players' imagination roam. And that's actually how Dota got created. And that's how you'll create the next subgenre.
It's probably how tower defense got created as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Peter, before we let you go, I did have a list of games I wanted to ask for your for your opinion on, but you've covered Dawn of War 4, you've covered Fallen Frontier, you've covered Game of Thrones, War for Westeros, which were three of the ones that I wanted to ask you about. So there's three others that I just want to get you to give me your opinion on, which are due up. And the first one is Dustfront. Now that's been in development for a while, hasn't it? But it looks so unique.
Yeah, the developer definitely has a unique vision, and there's a few reasons. First of all, he's Russian, and I think he's going to have a big issue how to sell his game because he cannot process card processors don't work in Russia anymore, as you know, because of the world events. And I try to stay away from politics. I'm not apolitical. I just stay away from that stuff in my channel because I get viewers, developers, gamers from all over the world. And always there's an issue between two countries. And I don't want to have that spark on my videos and comments and between my audience. So, but he's going to personally have a problem with how to publish and sell his game. And if he can solve that issue, I think he can publish it. And it's going to be a big hit, especially with the single player crowd.
The next one is Ashes of the Singularity 2, the sequel. What do you make? Because I think you covered this recently on your channel, the demo. What was your opinion of that title?
My biggest the reason why I like it so much is I was invited in October to start Oktoberfest with a few other content creators, and I saw it before it was even beta. I saw it in alpha, and after just playing it for like half an hour with Winter Gaming, he's another content creator, you probably know of him. We played in multiplayer, and I got the feeling that it was about being a general instead of being a commander. And that's something close to what Bar is. You feel more like a general of an entire army than a commander of a few very important units on a piece of the battlefield. You see the entire battlefield, you see the war, and that's how I feel when I play Ashes of Singularity 2. And I think that's an important change in paradigm because people are kind of getting bored of the small tactical level, but they also don't have the APM to control a huge war instead of a battle. And if a game can provide a way to use armies to reduce micro, to increase macro play, and give the player the feeling of being a general who is controlling a huge battlefield and having fun doing it, I think that's going to be a game that can attract a lot of players, might even attract from other genres.
And finally, Sanctuary Shattered Sun.
Well, as you know, they got endorsement from Chris Taylor. He was amazed at what they were doing. He sees it as they do as a spiritual successor to Supreme Commander 1, not 2. So that is one game that has a lot of potential, but I'm just afraid, is there a big enough audience? Because the audience for that kind of a game is already spread between the community-run FAF, the community is still stuck in there. As I said, they don't like to let go. So they're stuck in there. You've got people who transferred over to Bar, even though Total Annihilation and Supreme Commander aren't exactly the same, but they're close enough. And you've got people in 0K and a few other similar games. And I'm not sure will that game be able to pick all of them up and say, okay, this is the new flagship game for this subgenre or type of genre or type of RTS genre. Come over here, let's all play here. And I'm afraid they might stick to their already familiar games. And if the game doesn't grow, especially since they, if I understood correctly, they're just going with multiplayer at the start, not single player. Or at least not campaign and storytelling, just maybe skirmish. And they have AI that's just currently being worked on, not really a feature, but something just for testing, if I'm not mistaken. So I see that as a problem. I see that as a problem for them. They have a huge game, they have a great potential, but I'm not sure the audience is going to flock to it as it should.
if you had a message for the developers of Sanctuary Shattered Sun in order to ensure their success, what would it be?
It would be find investors and publishers who can pay for an amazing single player experience, and then you can do everything you want with the multiplayer once the player base is there.
Okay. I think we've covered a pretty good amount on our ideas about the future of RTS gaming in this episode. This was Peter. Peter, you can find him on his YouTube channel, Perafilozof. There will be a link in the description below if you're on YouTube. You can also find everything about our episodes on criticalmovespodcast.com. You can also join us on our Discord and tell us why we're so wrong about what we're saying and poke fun at us, and that's totally fine. Peter, anything else you'd like to share about what you do, about your channel, about anything you're working on?
Well, I would just like to invite your viewers to watch my artist news videos as they cover the most important dates on games they already play and they might play in the future. And I should probably mention that Stardock, the company that I visited, and their CEO decided to create a sort of a partnership with indie developers where they are going to pick 3 games per year that they're going to help publish, market, do social media for them, and just take off some of the hats that indie developers have to wear and just let them develop games and do that. So I think many of them should go to their website, check out what they are offering, and send them pitches to see if they get picked, because it's a huge opportunity for well, it's not a AAA studio, but it's a huge studio in the AA industry that can really help them market, finish development, push their game on Steam, and get the audience that starting audience that can spread the word about their game. So that's something that I want developers to try to get into.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right. Thanks again, Al. Thank you for joining me here.
Always a pleasure.
And that's our episode. Thank you all for listening at home. I wish you a lovely day, evening, morning, and happy RTS gaming.